On October 3rd, 1996, 10-year-old Emma Thomlinson pedaled her purple bike down Maple Lane, the same route she took every afternoon after school. But that evening, she never came home. Her bike was found beneath a maple tree, the back wheel still turning, and a handful of beads from her broken bracelet scattered in the dirt. But no sign of Emma. Police searched the fields and rivers of Uxbridge, chasing rumors and half-truths, until winter came and the trail went cold. For 23 years, the case remained unsolved, until new DNA technology uncovered a name no one expected. Tonight, we revisit the mystery that shattered a small Canadian town and reveal what the investigators finally discovered after more than 2 decades of silence. Subscribe, follow, and turn on the notification bell, because some stories never fade, and the truth always finds its way home. October 3rd, 1996, Uxbridge, Ontario. Maple leaves browned and cracked beneath the wheels of the yellow school bus, dust swirling along country roads. Houses stood scattered across fading fields, white paint peeling, porches cluttered with autumn's last flowers. The kind of town where quiet was not just a sound, but a habit. Life was predictable here, until the day it wasn't. 10-year-old Emma Thomlinson stepped down from the bus, her small feet crunching on gravel, a purple backpack bouncing against her spine. She wore a denim jacket with the elbows worn soft. Hanging from the zipper, a tiny butterfly keychain, plastic wings chipped but cherished. The driver waited, eyes on the mirror, until Emma crossed the road. Routine. Always routine. Inside her family's kitchen, a note was stuck to the refrigerator door with a faded magnet. Ran to the grocery store. Meet you later at the park. Her mother's handwriting, rushed but familiar. Emma scanned it, lips moving as she read, but barely paused. She tossed her backpack onto a chair, snatched an apple, and left again. The house fell quiet, as if holding its breath. Outside, the sky stretched pale and cloudless. Emma's bike, a small purple frame with white tires, leaned against the porch steps. She hopped on, pushing off with practiced confidence. Every afternoon, she rode the same route. Down Maple Lane, past the Thompsons' barking dog, past Mr. Lewis's vegetable stand. Nothing ever changed. But this afternoon, she hesitated at the end of her driveway, looking back once at the house. Maybe it was the silence. Maybe it was the feeling that something unseen was watching, waiting, just beyond the edge of ordinary. She pedaled on. Along the way, a car crept past, the engine idling low. Emma glanced over, uncertain, then kept moving. She waved to Mrs. Coleman, the elderly neighbor tending her garden, then turned the corner toward Elgin Park. A bead of sweat trickled down her forehead. The air tasted of dry leaves and distant rain. At home, time moved differently. The clock on the wall ticked, but nobody noticed. Emma's mother, Laura, was standing in line at the store, checking her watch every few minutes. Her father, Rick, was repairing a loose fence post at the far end of the yard, oblivious to everything except the stubborn nails and splinters in his palm. Uxbridge was the kind of place where trust replaced caution, where doors were left unlocked, and neighbors watched each other's children as their own. By 4:10 p.m., the sun was slanting low. Emma was supposed to meet her mom at the park, a ritual after school, swings creaking, shoes scuffing dusty ground, laughter echoing between the trees. But the park remained empty, its silence broken only by the cawing of distant crows. A woman in a red coat walked her dog through the park, pausing beside the empty swings. She looked around, sensing something amiss, then hurried on. Nearby, a teenage boy on a skateboard lingered at the edge of the parking lot, casting nervous glances at the road before vanishing down the sidewalk. Life flickered at the edges, unaware of the shadow creeping in. As the evening stretched on, the sun dipped behind the maples. The routine unraveled, subtle, almost unnoticeable at first. At 4:30 p.m., Laura arrived at the park, expecting to see her daughter. She called out, her voice steady, then rising. Minutes slipped by. Emma did not appear. There were no screams, no shattering glass, no dramatic warning. Only the ordinary, breaking apart, in slow motion. The sky turned gray, wind curling through empty spaces, as if the town itself was bracing for something it could not name. By nightfall, Uxbridge was already different. It just didn't know it yet. What really happened that afternoon? The answer would ripple outward, silent at first, then roaring, changing everything and leaving a mark that would never fade. The Thomlinsons lived on the last quiet stretch of Maple Lane, where yards faded into wild grass and the woods pressed close on all sides. Their house was plain, white-clappered with a sagging porch. It was unremarkable except for the music, piano notes drifting from the living room in the afternoons, Emma's laughter mingling with the sound, windows open even as the weather cooled. Laura Thomlinson, Emma's mother, gave lessons in that room. She had a gentle way about her, the patience to coax hesitant hands over ivory keys, the voice to soothe a child's stumbles. Students, mostly neighborhood children, came and went, their parents pausing to chat in the entryway, shoes damp with dew or snow. Laura knew every face, every story. She believed goodness was ordinary. Rick Thomlinson, her husband, was a man shaped by routine. He worked as an electrician, leaving before dawn and returning with dirt on his boots. He fixed everything that broke: wiring, leaky faucets, bicycles. He was not a man given to worry. In Uxbridge, there was little need for it. The world felt small and manageable, safe by design. Emma was their only child, a late gift, fiercely loved. Her room was a riot of color: stickers, books, half-finished drawings, treasures from the woods. She brought home stray animals and stray stories, chattered over dinner, filled the house with noise and energy. Her parents orbited around her, their lives drawn smaller and brighter by her presence. Beyond their backyard stood the woods, thick maples and birch, foxes and birds, secrets only children could find. Elgin Park, a few blocks away, was the heart of neighborhood life. After school, it filled with children, bikes tossed in the grass, backpacks forgotten as games spilled into dusk. The park was a meeting ground, the safe center of everyone's map. On the other side of the Thomlinson fence lived Calvin Bauer. He was 29, broad-shouldered, always a little shy around adults, more comfortable in overalls than conversation. He worked at the lumber mill and kept odd hours. Sometimes he helped Rick mend a fence or clear brush at the edge of the property. At Christmas, he left a tin of cookies on their doorstep, signed with a simple Calvin. He remembered Emma's birthday, once leaving a bag of peppermints and a hand-carved wooden bird at their door. He was a neighbor, not a friend. In a small town, sometimes the distinction blurred. He waved when he saw Emma on her bike, offered her candy with a nervous smile, fixed her chain when it slipped. To Laura and Rick, Calvin was harmless. Just another quiet soul making his way in the world. Uxbridge itself was woven tight by habit and memory. People greeted each other on the sidewalk by name. They shared ladders, recipes, secrets whispered over backyard fences. Children cut through yards without fear, rode their bikes until dark, trailed home by the sound of mothers calling from open doors. Locks were for big cities, not for here. That sense of safety was absolute until the evening of October 3rd. The word spread first as confusion, then as panic. Emma was missing. She had not arrived at the park. She had not come home. Laura's voice, so steady behind the piano, cracked and faltered. Rick scoured the woods, the road, the places where Emma might have wandered. Their world, once so stable, splintered under the weight of not knowing. Neighbors poured out into the streets, flashlights bobbing in the dusk. The police cruisers came, lights washing the porch in blue and red. Volunteers fanned out, calling, searching, refusing to believe what their hearts already feared. In living rooms across Uxbridge, families held their children closer, doors locked for the first time in years. That night, something old and quiet in Uxbridge broke apart. The story of the Thomlinsons, the story of trust, would never be the same. In its place, a new story took hold, sharp-edged and restless, filling the silence with questions nobody wanted to ask. Somewhere in the darkness, Emma's absence pressed against every window, every heart. And the town, for the first time, did not feel safe at all. The afternoon of October 3rd bled into evening, dragging with it a sense of growing unease. At 3:45 p.m., the school bus camera caught its last glimpse of Emma Thomlinson. Her small figure, burdened by her purple backpack, stepped off the bus 2 blocks from home. The neighborhood was still, nothing out of place, no warning signs in the ordinary rhythm. Mrs. Margaret Coleman, the neighbor tending her overgrown garden, watched Emma coast by on her bicycle. The girl's hair shone against the sunlight, and for a moment she seemed entirely carefree, pedaling toward Elgin Park. It was a path she had taken dozens of times, a ritual so familiar it felt unbreakable. Margaret would later remember a dark sedan idling across the street, a detail she almost forgot until it nagged her, days later, in the back of her mind. By 4:30 p.m., the streets near Elgin Park had emptied of children's laughter. Laura Thomlinson, arriving from the grocery store, expected to see Emma waiting by the swings. Instead, the park stood silent, only the faint wind disturbing a pile of yellow leaves. Laura circled the playground, calling her daughter's name, at first patient, then with a growing sharpness that barely masked her dread. Each unanswered call chipped away at her composure, the fear multiplying with every empty bench, every stranger's face. Rick arrived soon after, his work shirt stained with grease, confusion turning quickly to alarm. Together, they scoured the familiar routes. The trail behind the park, the shortcut past the old mill, the side streets where Emma sometimes played hopscotch with friends. Nobody had seen her. Nobody remembered anything unusual. The ordinariness of it all was almost offensive. At 6 p.m., Laura dialed 911. The call was flat, trembling at the edges, the words tumbling out in jagged fragments. Her daughter, missing, only 10, supposed to meet her at the park. The police arrived, their presence at first a relief, then a reminder that things had gone terribly, impossibly wrong. As dusk crept in, Uxbridge changed. The woods and fields, always welcoming, now seemed to press in with menace. Officers traced Emma's route on foot, canvassing neighbors, their radios crackling with static. The Tomlinsons' yard, once a haven, became a staging ground, flashlights flickering across grass, police dogs searching for a scent. The hum of panic vibrated just beneath the surface, pulling people from their homes, gathering them into clusters that murmured and watched and waited. That night, sleep vanished from the Tomlinson house. Laura sat at the kitchen table, hands wrapped around a cold mug of tea, replaying every memory of Emma's last morning. Rick paced the hallway, running lists in his head, friends, classmates, places Emma might have wandered. The phone rang often, each call a surge of hope, then disappointment. The morning brought no answers. Instead, it delivered a small, chilling clue. Just after sunrise, a searcher found Emma's purple bike abandoned beneath a sprawling maple along 3rd Concession Road. The back wheel spun lazily, as if Emma had only just left it. Next to it, half buried in the dirt, lay a broken beaded bracelet. The string snapped, a few wooden beads scattered in the grass. No footprints. No struggle. Only silence, heavy and absolute. The search expanded, more frantic now. Helicopters circled overhead. Volunteers swept through cornfields and creeks, voices echoing in the empty woods. But the woods gave up nothing. Emma had vanished. In Uxbridge, people began to whisper, suspicions souring the air. Parents clutched their children close. Neighbors looked at each other with new wariness. The world had become unfamiliar, cold, uncertain, shadowed by the loss of a single child. And the question, what happened to Emma, would haunt the town long after the sun rose and the searchers went home. Night fell over Uxbridge like a curtain, and by morning, the quiet town had become something else. The news of Emma's disappearance spread fast, first by telephone, then through hurried conversations on porches and at kitchen tables, until it seemed no one could speak of anything else. The sense of order, the idea that this was a place untouched by tragedy, shattered with each passing hour. By sunrise, more than 200 people had gathered, summoned by fear and a fierce determination. They arrived with flashlights, boots muddy from the fields, and hearts heavy with worry. Farmers, store clerks, teachers, retirees, they fanned out in organized lines across the land, combing ditches and brambles, sifting through tall grass and underbrush. The search parties moved slowly, each step measured, eyes searching for any trace. A piece of fabric, a shoe, a flash of purple. The police coordinated their efforts, dividing the woods and fields into a grid. Helicopters circled above, their blades slicing through the crisp morning air. The sound was foreign in this place, but nobody noticed the intrusion. All that mattered was finding Emma. Volunteers handed out maps and bottles of water at the makeshift command post in the school gymnasium. Someone set up tables with sandwiches and coffee. Nobody ate much. The town's church doors stood open, candles flickering beside a hastily printed sign. Missing. Emma Thomlinson, age 10, brown hair, blue eyes. Her school photograph, taped to telephone poles and shop windows, became a symbol of the collective fear, the face every parent saw when they closed their eyes. Laura Tomlinson saw the bracelet first, held gently in a gloved police officer's hand. It was Emma's, the beads painted in childish colors, the elastic snapped. Laura pressed her knuckles to her mouth, fighting to stay upright. The world narrowed to the small, broken thing in front of her. Rick, usually silent and controlled, let out a roar that startled even the officers, then stumbled away, calling Emma's name again and again, his voice raw and cracking. Hope faded quickly. Children who once wandered freely were now kept inside, watched from the windows by anxious parents. The playgrounds emptied, bicycles abandoned on lawns. At night, the sound of locks turning echoed through the streets, a new ritual in a town that had never needed one. Rumors grew like weeds. Stories spread of strangers seen near the park, of suspicious cars on country roads. The familiar became suspect. Trust, once woven into the fabric of Uxbridge, began to fray. Neighbors eyed each other over fences. Friends hesitated before knocking on doors. Still, the search went on. Men and women with lanterns traced the edges of the river. Dogs sniffed along trails, handlers urging them on. The autumn wind carried voices across fields, the sound thin and desperate. Inside their house, the Thomlinsons sat in the glow of the living room lamp, surrounded by search maps and lists of phone numbers. The phone rang often, each time a small, wild hope that was quickly extinguished. Laura barely slept, her eyes red and swollen. Rick moved from room to room, unable to settle, haunted by the sound of Emma's laughter echoing from every corner. Days blurred together, each one colder than the last. News crews came and went. Reporters asked questions nobody wanted to answer. The town, once vibrant and ordinary, now felt suspended in time, a single name echoing through the silence. If it could happen to the Thomlinsons, it could happen to anyone. That thought spread faster than any news broadcast, settling in the bones of Uxbridge, changing it forever. The trust that had built this place was gone. In its place remained only fear and a desperate, stubborn hope that somewhere, somehow, Emma would come home. Police worked quickly to build a timeline. Every minute mattered, but the hours felt already lost. The bus had dropped Emma off at 3:45 p.m. She was seen pedaling her purple bike toward Elgin Park shortly after, the last ordinary moment on an otherwise unremarkable day. Between 4:15 and 4:30, she disappeared. The gap was small, but inside it was a darkness that seemed impossible to measure. Uxbridge, a town unaccustomed to suspicion, now became a place of quiet interrogations and shadowed glances. The search for Emma turned inward. As police fanned out, asking questions at every door, the people of Maple Lane found themselves looking at their neighbors differently. The first to fall under scrutiny was Calvin Bauer, the Thomlinsons' closest neighbor, the man with rough hands and a gentle manner. Always alone except for his dog and his tools. He'd helped Rick with the fence, brought cookies for Christmas, once fixed the chain on Emma's bike. The routine kindness now looked, in the harsh light of loss, like something else entirely. Police questioned him late into the evening. He told them he'd been working a double shift at the lumber mill, stacking planks, hauling timber, losing track of time under the harsh fluorescent lights. But nobody at the mill remembered seeing him. His alibi was a fog, hard to grasp. They searched his home. The officers found only the detritus of a solitary life. Laundry baskets, half-eaten dinners, a box of peppermint candy on the kitchen table, faded community photos tacked to the wall. There were no answers, just more questions. The town divided quickly. Some believed Calvin's quiet ways hid something dark. Others defended him, insisting he was just a man broken by loneliness, not evil. The lines between friend and suspect blurred. For the Thomlinsons, the weight of suspicion felt like another kind of grief. They'd trusted him, shared meals, left Emma in his care, never thinking danger could be so close. Attention then shifted to Ethan Reese, a 17-year-old paperboy with a thin, restless face and a reputation for small-time theft. He lived a few blocks from the park, spent hours on his bike cutting through alleys and side streets. The police brought him in, combed through his room, checked the tread of his sneakers against the dirt near the bike. Rumors grew wild and reckless. Ethan seen arguing with Emma at the playground. Ethan pocketing cash from unlocked cars. None of it fit, but the town, desperate for answers, clung to whatever might ease the ache of not knowing. The investigation spilled into the routines of daily life. Parents escorted children everywhere, eyes scanning strangers. Rick, exhausted and angry, drifted through the house, replaying every memory for clues he'd missed. Laura's friends visited less, their conversations taut and careful. The Thomlinsons' home, once alive with music and laughter, became silent. A place of waiting and dread. Days bled into weeks. The posters faded, edges curling in the damp air. Search parties shrank as hope waned. Emma's bike, retrieved and cleaned, leaned unused in the garage, a silent witness to all that was lost. The officers who had once promised quick answers now avoided eye contact, their voices flat and rehearsed. In the background, the machinery of rumor kept grinding. Theories, accusations, names whispered at kitchen tables long after midnight. In Uxbridge, the loss of Emma Thomlinson was no longer just a private sorrow. It was a rift in the foundation of the town itself. The days grew shorter. The cold crept in. Trust, once as common as sunlight, was now scarce, guarded, and fleeting. 2 months passed. Winter settled hard over Ontario, burying fields and streets beneath layers of snow, muffling the world into a hush that pressed on every house. In Uxbridge, the search for Emma faded from the daily rhythm, replaced by a different kind of vigilance, one that looked inward, replaying old memories, quietly fearing what could never be made right. Christmas came and went without music in the Thomlinson house. The piano keys gathered dust. The holiday lights were never strung. Laura moved through the days like a ghost, eyes fixed on the spaces where Emma used to play, hands always busy, as if the right movement might bring her daughter home. Rick sat by the window, watching the yard vanish under snow, his tools untouched in the shed. Even the dog, restless and confused, wandered from room to room, searching for the sound of Emma's voice. The police visits grew less frequent. At first, officers had filled the living room with maps and coffee cups, voices low and urgent as they talked through leads. Now, they came only to update, faces closed off, their promises quieter. "We're still looking," they said. But their words felt hollow, echoes that faded as soon as the door closed behind them. On December 28th, a hunter walking through York Regional Forest, 40 kilometers from Uxbridge, saw something caught in the underbrush, half hidden by snow. At first, it looked like a bundle of old clothes, but as he stepped closer, dread blossomed in his chest. The forest, silent and frozen, bore witness as he radioed for help, voice shaking. Police cordoned off the scene, lights flashing between the bare trees, boots crunching on ice. The call reached Uxbridge with brutal speed. It was Emma. The forensic details were clinical, stripped of comfort. She had been sexually assaulted and stabbed multiple times. No struggle, no footprints, just evidence of violence, then silence. The snow preserved almost nothing. The medical examiner collected DNA samples, swabbed fabric, gathered hairs and fibers. The technology of 1996 could do only so much. The DNA yielded a blood type, male, nothing more. The Thomlinsons' grief was not the sudden, noisy kind. It moved slow and deep, changing everything it touched. Laura wept behind closed doors, her sobs quiet, exhausted. Rick's anger cooled into a brittle, unbreakable shell. The town mourned with them, funeral casseroles on the doorstep, candles lit in windows, silent processions passed the house. But Uxbridge was never the same. The sense of safety was gone. Parents hurried children home before dusk. People no longer stopped to chat in driveways. Eyes flicked toward shadows and strangers. The town that once left its doors open now watched the world through locks and curtains. The investigation limped forward. The police checked their suspects again. Calvin Bauer, still haunted by suspicion, had little to say. His alibi remained unproven. The search of his property turned up nothing new, no signs, no traces, just the stubborn neatness of a man desperate to prove he had nothing to hide. Ethan Reese was cleared by DNA. The paperboy's record reduced again to petty mischief. Spring came, and still the file sat on the detective's desk, cold, growing heavier with every passing week. The case was officially declared cold in 1997. The town moved on, the way all towns do, but the Thomlinsons could not. Every October, Laura returned to Elgin Park, placing a bouquet of purple flowers beneath the little angel statue at the playground, the spot where Emma was supposed to meet her. By 2001, the family had left Uxbridge, their house sold, their belongings packed in silence, their memories too sharp to endure. In the years that followed, the Thomlinsons became a cautionary tale, a whispered warning. If it could happen to them, it could happen to anyone. For Uxbridge, Emma's story faded to rumor and shadows, her name spoken less often, but never truly forgotten. Beneath the surface, the town carried her absence, a wound that never closed, waiting for the truth to thaw it from the ice. Time passed, indifferent and relentless. Uxbridge's memory of Emma faded at the edges, her name spoken less often, reduced to a cautionary whisper at dusk. The Thomlinson family was gone, their house lived in by strangers, the piano sold, the rooms stripped of color and laughter. Even the purple bike, once a fixture in neighborhood driveways, became a ghostly detail only the oldest neighbors remembered. Life rebuilt itself, as it always does. But for Laura and Rick Thomlinson, there was no true rebuilding, only endurance. Every year, on October 3rd, Laura made the silent drive back to Elgin Park. She left purple flowers beneath the angel statue, her offering to a past that refused to loosen its grip. Rick never returned, carrying his pain to new towns and empty jobs, unable to look back. By 2019, the case was old enough to gather dust in the archives of the Toronto Cold Case Unit. Most detectives who had touched the file had retired or died. New faces replaced them. Younger men and women who knew Emma only from grainy photographs and brittle case notes. The world had changed. Uxbridge had changed. Technology had changed most of all. Forensic genealogy, a phrase unknown in the 1990s, now offered what grief and determination could not. This technology could compare DNA from decades-old evidence to massive online family tree databases, finding relatives, then suspects, with a precision once impossible. In 2019, a young detective requested the preserved DNA samples from Emma's clothing and the evidence collected in York Regional Forest. He waited, the way all detectives must, as the machines hummed in sterile labs, cross-checking thousands of profiles against a vast digital map of ancestry and bloodlines. Weeks passed, marked only by the thrum of traffic and the changing seasons. Then, an email, a match. The computer produced a name: Calvin Bauer, the neighbor. The man whose life had once been scrutinized and dismissed, whose cookies had sat uneaten in the Thomlinsons' kitchen, whose face had faded to the edges of collective memory. Bauer was dead. He had taken his own life in 2012, years after Emma's body was found, after the police had stopped knocking on his door. The report listed depression, alcohol, a pattern of absence and retreat. His wife, left behind, had moved far from Uxbridge, seeking a place where his shadow would not follow. For the investigators, the breakthrough was both relief and defeat. The DNA, matched by science now so advanced it could not have been imagined at the time, was conclusive. But justice, if that was ever possible, could not be served. The suspect was gone. The questions, instead of shrinking, multiplied. For the Thomlinsons, the revelation landed with a crushing finality. Laura received the call at her apartment in a different city, the words barely registering at first. She had defended Bauer, believed in his innocence, argued against rumors even as the town turned cold. At Christmas, she and Rick had sent a card to his wife. She had baked extra cookies for him, told Emma to be kind, to trust the people around her. Now all of that felt poisoned, a betrayal that went deeper than violence, a wound that would not heal. Uxbridge, too, reeled. News spread fast, amplified by social media and the relentless machinery of modern curiosity. People remembered the neighbor with the quiet voice, the man who fixed bikes and handed out peppermints. They remembered the days when trust had been easy and wondered what else had gone unseen, what dangers still lurked behind familiar faces. There were no angry mobs, no shouts in the street, only a silence more chilling than outrage. In the aftermath, the investigation was closed. Officially, the case was solved. But in living rooms and coffee shops across Uxbridge, and in the empty house where the Thomlinsons had once lived, the truth felt as cold as the day Emma disappeared. The town had its answer. It brought no peace. Some betrayals echo forever. Some truths arrive too late. On the morning of October 15, 2019, the people of Uxbridge gathered in the square outside Town Hall, drawn by the same compulsion that had once sent them searching through fields and woods for a missing girl. Now they stood shoulder to shoulder beneath a sky that threatened rain, their faces older, marked by years that had quietly hardened everyone's edges. The news trucks lined the curb, antennae raised, reporters shifting from foot to foot as they waited for something definitive to break the town's long silence. Inside, Toronto police took their places behind the podium, a large screen flickering with the photograph of Calvin Bauer, the neighbor, the helper, the man whose smile most now remembered as distant and blurred. The officer's voice was flat and precise, stripped of ceremony. Based on DNA evidence, we believe Calvin Bauer was responsible for the death of Emma Thomlinson. The statement cut through the crowd, falling heavy and absolute. There were no cries, only a low rustle. Coats brushed together, people shifting their weight. The air was thick with the weight of collective memory. The posters, the desperate search, the flicker of hope that had been buried by winter snow and, for years, by the routine of ordinary life. Uxbridge had waited decades for an answer, but the answer brought no comfort. Laura Thomlinson stood in the back, her hands clenched around a folded piece of paper, knuckles white. The years had silvered her hair and etched lines around her eyes, but in that moment she was unchanged, a mother still searching for a reason, for a way to understand how a friend had become the shadow that undid her world. She remembered sending Emma off on her bike, the trust that was as natural as breathing, and now felt each memory twist, sharp and senseless. She had spent years defending Bauer, arguing his innocence when rumors swelled and the community fractured. She had told Emma to wave to him, to be polite, to never be afraid of the people who lived next door. Even after Emma's death, Laura had found ways to rationalize his presence, to believe in decency because she needed the world to make sense, to learn, after decades, that her faith had been misplaced, that the person she defended was the very source of her loss, was a kind of grief that burned as fiercely as the first day. Rick was not there. He had disappeared into his own silence years before, unable to witness the reopening of old wounds that had never truly healed. But for Laura, there was a hollow sort of closure, a line drawn at last under the long, unbroken sentence of uncertainty. She listened as the officer spoke about advancements in DNA technology, about justice catching up to a world that had once failed a little girl, about the lessons learned and the importance of remembering. But Uxbridge was not soothed. The crowd lingered long after the press conference ended, speaking in low voices, eyes flicking to familiar faces, old doubts stirring. Some left flowers near the playground at Elgin Park. Others retreated to quiet kitchens, locking their doors before nightfall. The town's trust, once so strong, now felt brittle, its surface cracked by the knowledge that evil had worn the face of a neighbor, moved quietly through birthday parties and holiday dinners. Questions hung in the air. How could nobody have seen? Was there something they had all missed? A warning? A sign? The realization settled over them. Safety had never been guaranteed, not even in the smallest towns, not even among friends. For some, anger replaced fear. For others, fear became a new way of life. Parents who had once let children roam returned to habits of caution, double-checking locks, watching from windows as dusk fell. The story of Emma Thomlinson, once spoken in hope and sorrow, now became a lesson. The angel statue in the park collected new offerings, stuffed animals, handwritten notes, faded photographs. Each gesture was a silent apology, a wish that things could have been different. In the end, Uxbridge was changed not by the crime itself, but by the slow revelation that trust was not protection, that danger could look like a neighbor, and that sometimes the truth, when it finally arrives, brings only more silence. The press conference was meant to close the case, to lay Emma's story to rest at last. Yet, as the days went by, a new unease settled over Uxbridge. The truth had come late, so late that it left behind more questions than comfort. Life resumed its old rhythms, but underneath, there was a sense of unfinished business, a restless current running through the routines of the town. Weeks after the announcement, a follow-up forensic report arrived at the Toronto Cold Case Unit. The analysts, careful and methodical, had gone over every scrap of evidence, every hair, every fiber, every trace left behind in the frozen ground of York Regional Forest. The DNA match to Calvin Bauer was strong, 97%. The margin, small but significant, raised new doubts. Scientists found trace evidence of a second male contributor, faint, degraded, but present. The implication was unmistakable. Bauer might not have acted alone. Rumor returned to Uxbridge, moving faster than ever before. The town had wanted a single villain, a story with a beginning and an end. But now the old suspicions were revived, sharpened by the possibility that another predator had been among them all along. The idea was as chilling as the autumn wind rattling through the empty swings at Elgin Park. Then, in a twist that felt almost theatrical, a letter arrived at the Toronto Police Department. It was anonymous, a single sheet of cheap paper with words typed in stark black ink. Bauer never hunted alone. No signature, no clues, just a chilling certainty, dropped like a stone into still water, sending out ripples of doubt. Detectives reopened the files, reviewed every name, every statement. They retraced steps through the town's past, called up old witnesses, pieced together timelines long since buried beneath years of forgetting. People who had tried to move on now found themselves haunted all over again. The questions multiplied. Who wrote the letter? Who else had walked the woods that night? What else had the town failed to see? For Laura Thomlinson, the reopening of the case was a reopening of wounds. The fragile closure she had clung to was gone. She was pulled back into a world of interviews and uncertainty. Her trust in memory and community shattered yet again. She answered questions with a voice made thin by grief and exhaustion. Each call from the detectives was a new reminder that the past would not stay buried, that the absence in her life could always grow deeper. Uxbridge, once defined by its certainty, became a town of whispered warnings and guarded eyes. The playground was quieter than ever. The park bench near the angel statue always kept clean by anonymous hands. New parents, who had moved to Uxbridge for its reputation as a safe place, learned the old story in careful fragments, shared in hushed voices, always ending with a caution. If it happened once, it could happen again. The town's fear, once a sharp flare, now burned low and steady, a quiet ache beneath the surface of daily life. The familiar faces were now marked by suspicion. Old friends became distant. Neighbors who had trusted each other for decades found themselves second-guessing memories, replaying encounters that had once seemed harmless. What had they missed? Who had they misjudged? At night, the sound of a car engine on a quiet road, or a knock at the door after dark, triggered a pulse of anxiety, a reminder that some dangers never really leave. The question that haunted everyone was the simplest and the hardest to answer. Was another predator still out there, hiding in plain sight? As winter returned to Ontario, the story of Emma Thomlinson slipped back into rumor and shadow. But this time, there was no comfort in forgetting, no safety in routine. The case that was supposed to be over had come alive again, and Uxbridge would never sleep quite so easily. Never quite trust the world as it once had. Some stories refuse to end, some wounds never fully heal, and some truths once uncovered only deepen the darkness they were meant to dispel. The story of Emma Thomlinson became more than a headline, more than an unsolved crime. Over the years, it grew into a legacy, a warning, a memory, a shadow that followed the town of Uxbridge through every season. For outsiders, it was a chilling story told in documentaries, a cold case dissected by strangers online. But for those who had lived it, the loss was intimate and enduring. Emma's absence was stitched into the fabric of the town, a name whispered at the park gate, a face glimpsed in old photographs at the community center, a story never far from the surface. It was not just Emma's family who grieved. but a whole generation who had grown up with her. Friends who once traded sandwiches at lunch or lined up for the school bus found adulthood marked by an unspoken bond, a knowledge that life could change in an instant, that innocence was not invincible. Some moved away, chasing distance from memory. Others stayed, determined to build a safer world for their own children, double-checking locks and hesitating at dusk when playground laughter faded. The case was officially declared closed, then open again, then cold once more. In time, it became clear that true closure would never arrive. The unanswered questions lingered. What if someone else had been involved? What warnings had been missed? How could trust be rebuilt in a place where trust had been the very thing betrayed? For Laura and Rick Thomlinson, the years brought only different kinds of pain. Laura moved often, never settling long, carrying her memories in boxes, Emma's school books, her drawings, the broken butterfly keychain, a handful of purple beads. She spoke at schools and police conferences when she had the strength, urging others to believe that danger could exist anywhere, that vigilance mattered, even in the quietest towns. Rick faded from public life, a man hollowed out by absence, unable to find peace in a world that had taken everything from him. Sometimes, in a new town, someone would ask about children, and he would simply say, "We lost our daughter," and nothing more. Each October, purple flowers still appeared at Elgin Park beneath the angel statue, sometimes left by Laura, sometimes by others who remembered. The offerings changed with the years. A crayon drawing, a hand-knit scarf, a note folded tight with words of apology and hope. The statue became a place of silent pilgrimage, a reminder and a promise to keep watch for those who could not protect themselves. The story of Emma Thomlinson was inspired by the real case of Christine Jessup, a 9-year-old girl who vanished from Queensville, Ontario, in 1984. For 36 years, her family waited. DNA technology finally identified her killer, Calvin Hoover, a man well known to her family, someone trusted, a presence in their daily life. The revelation came too late for justice, but not too late for truth. From these stories, hard lessons remain. Never assume safety simply because a place feels peaceful or because danger is supposed to happen somewhere else. Always trust instincts, even when they go against habit or politeness, because every minute matters. And never lose faith in the relentless pursuit of the truth, because science can bring answers that time and memory try to erase. In the end, some wounds can only be healed by truth. For Uxbridge, for the Thomlinsons, for every family forced to carry the weight of not knowing, the only hope lies in memory and vigilance, in telling the stories again and again, refusing to let them fade, refusing to let silence win. Somewhere, there are voices still waiting to be heard. Justice is slow, and sometimes it comes too late, but the act of remembering keeps it alive. To honor Emma Thomlinson, Christine Jessup, and all the others lost to unimaginable cruelty, the work goes on, not just to solve old cases, but to build a world where trust is no longer the thing that endangers the innocent.